We're going to continue our discussion about writing classes by continuing with the topics of both accessor methods and mutator methods. And so the last time that we were talking, we actually had already written some accessor methods. And our goal is going to be kind of talk a little bit more about those and then to talk about mutator methods as well. So we didn't get really too far into it last time, but what we had was the student class with these different constructors that we made for us, and then we also created these what we called accessor methods. So commonly we refer to them as accessor methods. You might also hear them referred to as get methods because we usually name them as get something, get name, get year, whatever. And then we can also refer to these as getter methods. You'll hear that a lot as well. And so typically what they do is they just return the value of whatever the attribute is that we're trying to talk about. They always, or generally speaking, aren't going to take in a parameter because we don't want to actually change anything. We don't want to take in those values and do anything, with them as far as changing our attributes. And so they don't take anything, and all they do without changing the object that we're referring to at all is just return a certain value. And so we wrote all these, and they're pretty straightforward, but we want to talk about one more kind of special, what we would consider to be an accessor method. So I'm actually going to jump over to my console here. And actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to go jump over to my student tester file. And it looks like we already have a student here, which is great. And we printed out its name. But actually, I'm just curious to know what will happen. And we might have already talked about this. What happens if I just print out student 1? Because if this is a variable like, an integer, x equals 5, what is it going to print? It's going to print out the value of 5. Well, what actually gets printed? What is going to represent what student 1 is? And so that's a great question. We're going to go ahead and save this and then run it and compile. And of course, compile is just fine. And then I will run my student tester. And what I get is this weird set of characters. So I have student. That is the name of the object or the class, the type of the variable that I printed out. This at, and then I'm going to get this seemingly random set of characters. And what that is a representation, a hexadecimal representation of the location of my variable on the machine. And so this is essentially what it represents is the memory address of this variable. And so obviously, generally speaking, that is not super useful. If we wanted to have a situation where we have different objects and they're pointing at different things, and some were pointing at the same thing, and we wanted to be able to tell whether or not they were pointing at the same thing, then maybe our address would be useful to us. But generally speaking, it's not. If I want to print out something to do with my student, it's probably gonna be something different. Than that. It's probably gonna be the name or whatever it is. So the question is, why does this get printed out? And so it's actually happening here, and we're not going to be able to fully explain this until actually significantly later in the course. But a method is being called, which is the toString method. And you might ask, well, what is the toString method? There is no toString method in my student class, and the answer is that we can actually create classes that are subclasses of other classes. And so what that means is later on in the course, in unit I think 9 to be specific, we're going to talk about how I can create a class that takes the attributes of another class. And so what's happening here is that actually all classes that we create are subclasses of the object class. And so the object class is like the overarching superclass of all classes. And inside it, there's several different methods that exist, of which one of them is the toString method. It looks like this, toString method. And what it does is it creates a something that will be printed out, or rather the string version of that object that we're referring to. So actually, if I save this, I go and compile and I run again, what I will get is the exact same thing. And the reason for that is because what is implicitly being done whenever I print something is the toString method is being called. So those were equivalent statements I just had there. Whenever I have a print line or a print statement and I put a variable inside, the toString method is what is implicitly being called. And so the thing is that I might want to change the toString method so that it prints out something that's, slightly more useful to me. And so it is you can kind of think of, I mean, not kind of, it is, it's just not what we typically think of. But the toString method is a getter, is an accessor method. And so we are going to do what's called overriding, writing, so it's RIDING, overriding that method, so that it does something different. So it prints out something that's more useful to us. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. And so we have to use the exact same name and signature line of what the toString method is in the object class. And what that looks like is public and then string and then nope, still not that. toString takes in no parameters because it's an accessor method. And then I have to determine what I would like it to print out. So in this case, well, what's the information that I really want to print out if I'm talking about a student? I probably want to, let's just say I think the most important piece of information about a student are their name and their grade. Later on, we're probably going to end up adding more things to this, besides just the GPA and whether or not they're happy. Let us just, I think the defining qualities for most students are going to be their name and their grade. And so what I'm going to return is, let's see, this dot name plus, and then grade plus, and then this dot year. Yeah, that's what I want. So what this will print out is the name of the student and then their grade. Okay, and so now what I'm going to get in this toString method, whenever it is called, is going to print out something that's slightly more useful, slightly more, or tells more information to me about the student, instead of just telling the memory address. So if I save this, and I go back and I actually call this, I call the .toString can't see what I'm writing, toString method, I go and run it, what I'm going to get now is Alan, grade 12. And in fact, just to be absolutely clear about what's going on, I can also delete this and get the exact same thing, because what's automatically being called whenever I'm using my what is being called whenever I use print or print line on a variable is the toString method. And so if I compile again and I run again, I get the exact same thing. So the toString method is a special type of accessor method. It's one that already exists in the object class, which is like the super class of all classes. And we are overriding it to do this thing. So that is accessor methods. The last thing we need to talk about then are what are called mutator methods. So mutator methods, their actual goal is to change the class, or sorry, not the class, but an object, an instance of that class. And so I'm gonna have to take a step back and ask myself, okay, so what does that entail exactly? Well, I don't anticipate a situation where a student's gonna have to change their name, and so because of that, I am not gonna write a mutator method. This is a private variable. Once my student is constructed, their name cannot be changed. And that is because the variable itself is private, and I'm not going to have any setter methods. In fact, we have a word for that. That is what's referred to as immutable. I-M-M-U-T-A-B-L-E. I said that really fast. I-M-M-U-T-A-B-L-E. Yep. Immutable. And that's going to be really embarrassing if I spelled that wrong. But that means that it can't be changed. Once I create my my object off my constructor, I can no longer change the name of it based on what I have here. I'm going to want to change my year at some point, but I don't want to just be able to change the year, like, and set it to anything. Like, I shouldn't be able to take someone in grade 12 and just change their year to grade 9. So I'm probably going to have to set up a special method, which we'll do later. Same thing with GPA. I think that one thing that we can change on a regular basis, though, is whether or not they're happy. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new method, which is called a mutator method, which will take in a parameter, potentially, and then it can change that attribute of that student. So in this case, what's going to look like is public, typically speaking, our mutator methods don't return anything. They're not returning anything because I'm not getting a value back. All I'm doing is I'm changing a value that's already there inside of my object. So void is what it returns, so nothing. And then I'm going to set this name to set and then happy. All right, so like I said, we usually call these set methods, or we call them setter methods for this reason. And so I've got set happy. What is it going to take in? It's going to take a Boolean to, let's just go with happy. Taking a Boolean value for what or how happy our student is, right? So what could happen is that true, they are happy, and then I take in true again, it just sets it to be true, and so nothing's changed. Or I could end up taking in a false value, and it could, change that happiness value. And so what this looks like then is I'm just gonna take this dot happy. So the value, the happy value of this student will get updated to the happy value of what I'm taking in. Okay, because this happy refers to what's currently in scope, which is this value, the parameter, versus this dot happy refers to the happy value of my object. So as simple as that. This will now change my value. So if I go back, Alan is currently happy. I can change that, of course. And so I can say student one dot operator and then set happy to be false. And then I can just check to make sure that actually worked. I can student one dot get happy, call that. And then I'm going to, I don't like leaving it this way. I don't want to leave Alan upset. So I'm going to immediately change him back to being happy again. That seems like that's what I want to do. Okay, so let me save this and let me run it just to make sure everything is hunky-dory, and it is in fact the case. So for a brief moment there, Alan was unhappy, which was, kind of upsetting me. And so I went ahead and changed it back to be true, that he is happy. And so when I got the happy value again, it said that he was true. And we printed out what Alan was. All right, so that is getter and setter methods, otherwise known as, I don't remember what order I said it, getter and setter. So mutator and accessor methods. These are like the basic versions of them, where these accessor methods just gave us back a value and did nothing else, which is typically what accessor methods do. Mutator methods, on the other hand, can take a whole wide range of things. Because, for example, what we'll look at probably later is, well, what if we want to, write a function that, takes in the grade for a class and updates your GPA accordingly. So it's not just setting the GPA. It is changing the GPA's value based on some type of calculation, based on some type of input from, a class grade or something along those lines. So getter and setter methods are pretty basic as far as what they look like and what they do, but obviously super important to provide accessibility and then mutability, so the ability to change a class. So yeah, I think that's everything we have to talk about, and we will extend this in a future video.